We all have our own behind-the-wheel persona. Are you a windows down, sing-along to your favorite song, seat lean back kind of driver? Or perhaps an AC blasting, podcast on, hugging the wheel kind of driver? However you move through life, Atlantic Union Bank is on board because we agree things should be done your way, especially banking. Work with someone you trust who's there when you need them for all the ways you bank. Call, schedule a video appointment, or make a pit stop at an Atlantic Union Bank branch to learn more. Atlantic Union Bank. Any way you bank.
How about Captain Crunch's Crunch Berries with breakfast?
Whoa, Dad, we're on
Crunch Island. It's Jean Lefoot.
And he stole our crunch.
Quick, the zip line.
He's getting away.
Throw our last Crunch Berry. No! No one steals my Crunch Berries.
I think you mean my crunch berries. Choose your own crunch venture with Cap'n Crunch.
Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor for the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing how an initiative to repeal Washington's carbon auctions might already be lowering gas prices, problems with a proposal to build the largest wind farm in the state, a controversy surrounding a candidate for governor and his party's response, and a Seattle nonprofit looking into making the area around McStabby's a bit safer. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Do you care about school spending, classroom curriculums, and transparency policies in education, but find it hard to cut through the partisan noise? The nonprofit Franklin News Foundation is bringing you straight news reporting on education through Chalkboard News. We're talking news without spin. Franklin brings fact-based news that makes sense to everyday parents, teachers, and readers who have skin in the game. By donating to Franklin, you can help American families and communities receive the education-focused news they deserve. Become a supporter today at franklinnews.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Now, let's jump into the headlines. Voters will ultimately have the final say in November as to whether the Climate Commitment Act and its cap and trade auction will close up shop. But as Washington editor Brett Davis dove into this week, the mere threat of its demise could be bringing down gas prices for Washington commuters. First off, Brett, connect the dots between the CCA and higher gas prices.
Right. So, per the 2021 Climate Commitment Act passed by the state legislature and signed into law by Governor Jay Inslee, which took effect at the beginning of last year, Washington's cap and trade program, it basically requires emitters to obtain what are called emissions allowances equal to their covered greenhouse gas emissions. It's basically similar to stocks and bonds. These allowances can be obtained through quarterly auctions hosted by the Department of Ecology. And as you can imagine, these companies pass on the increased costs of doing business to customers. Critics say the carbon auctions added up to 50 cents to the cost of a gallon of gas in 2023. You may remember for a few weeks during the summer of 2023, Washington actually had the distinction of having the highest gas prices in the nation. It was competing for that unfortunate honor with California, and prices
which also has a carbon auction.
Right.
Coincidentally.
And prices back then hovered at around $5 a gallon in Washington. So yes, I remember this very well.
Right. Your wallet
remembers
the muscle memory from paying for gas over the summer. Yeah. Right. Okay.
Prices are now they're around $4 or more now. So a little bit lower than last summer, but still not great.
Yeah. And the auctions are now, as you reported, reacting to a potential situation where those credits could not worth anything. Right.
You're referring to Initiative 2117 that would basically get rid of the CCA.
Yeah.
So back in 2023, settlement prices for a carbon credit ranged from a low of $48.50 to a high of $63.03. And the first two auctions this year, so in 2024, the first quarter auction price was down to $25.76, which raised approximately $135 million in state proceeds. The second quarter auction price was $29.92, which brought in roughly $157 million for the state. So that's quite a drop in the prices. To put that in perspective, last year's quarterly auctions and a couple of special auctions brought in some $2 billion in total revenue. The state's portion of that revenue generated goes to things, like decarbonization initiatives to help the state transition to clean energy and a low carbon economy. Things like climate change mitigation, health and construction programs, transportation emissions, and the like. So,
right. And what you had reported it also, there's the cap and trade sale, but there's also, you can buy those credits in a futures market. And we'd reported on this before about how they were looking at this and just the potential of the initiative passing in November. They were trading down months ago. So this is not something that we're seeing new. This is actually just the cost of the real-time purchases. But the people that were buying futures already kind of had that hint, didn't they?
Right, they did. I almost included that in the story, but it was already so long I didn't throw it in there. But yeah, this is part of a trend. It's not a one-off thing. So this seems to be, like I said, seems to be a trend.
Now, not that polling is ever the final say, but in terms of this initiative, what are people saying and telling pollsters about how they might vote this fall?
So there was a Scott Rasmussen national survey of 800 registered voters in the state that was conducted between May 20 and May 23rd. Those polls identified 31% said they were Republican and 37% said they were Democrat. Now, when they were asked if they favored or opposed Initiative 2117 to get rid of the Climate Commitment Act, 45% of residents said they favored a repeal, while 39% said they opposed it, and 16% weren't sure. But when the question was changed up to include Washington State's high gas prices, those numbers changed a lot. 67% then said they were in favor of Initiative 2117, and 26% said they were opposed, and 7% remained unsure. So, just bringing up the high gas prices seemed to really get people's attention.
Yeah, that's what's tricky with polling, is that if you bring forth the consequences, or you tie in things like if you explain that it is the reason why Washingtonians are paying such a high gas price in terms of 50 cents, up to 50 cents a gallon more, it can manipulate those polls. And so there's a similar phenomenon at the ballot with these products. There's a law in Washington, right, that says the attorney general can put a note, like a product warning label on these initiatives if the initiative would affect revenue.
Right.
And there's been other polls that have said if the attorney general says that, the carbon credit auction repeal would directly affect all of these great things that it's tangentially connected to. But at the same time, lawmakers can say it's revenue that goes towards this point, this thing, schools, bridges, roads, when it's not. I mean, but it's all fungible revenue, so that they technically they can't say that. You see this going in the opposite direction, where
it's all about how it's framed.
Exactly. And you see polling that if it shows that those warning labels are attached, people that are on the fence don't necessarily support it as much. So it's product buyer beware, I suppose, moving into this fall. But we will see.
November 5, we'll find out for sure.
We will see where the chips fall this November, and we'll track these prices moving forward. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you.
Governor Jay Inslee is pushing to have a massive wind farm built in southern Washington. Now, the governor wants it bigger, and he wants it done sooner. But investigative reporter TJ Martinell found out this week that there are some hangups with not only where it's being built, but how it's going to operate in the first place. Give some background on this project, TJ.
So the Energy Site Facility Evaluation Council is looking at this project, and they're doing the planning. So they are effectively deciding how big it's going to be and any of the environmental restrictions. What they did is they imposed a buffer zone around these historic hawk nest sites to protect them from being affected by the wind turbines. Governor Inslee is opposed to that because it would reduce the size of the wind farm and not produce as much clean energy as he's wanting it to. So he sent the proposed certification agreement back to them saying you need to redo this, make it bigger, and come up with other mitigation options to protect the nest sites.
And now, I mean, in this board you mentioned, they're getting pressured by Inslee to go bigger, and now they're meeting and saying, well, what do we do at this point? Because they're, in a way, they are kind of beholden to Inslee. I mean, if they're not appointed outright, it's all kind of the man that runs the state, and he's wanting them to run afoul of these environmental restrictions.
Right. That's the issue, is they're trying to figure out, how do we do this without running afoul of other environmental laws? Because there are other laws. There are groups that could sue over this certification agreement if it's approved. And based on some of the comments made at the meeting, some of the members were not really persuaded by Inslee's letter. They're looking at it saying this was a compromise to, build the site, but also impose these reasonable environmental protections. What do we do? Because some of them felt like he's asking them. It's almost like he's asking them to bring him heated ice.
Yes, absolutely. In terms of the size and scope, do you have explain just how big this thing would, if it does full scope come to fruition as Inslee would like it to? How big is this thing?
I mean, we're talking 72,000 acres and that's just the property that the center would be on. But we're talking the largest wind farm in the state. So right. We're talking, there's going to be a lot of, not just going to be wind turbines, but there's also going to be solar panels as well.
Yeah. And now it also sounds like there's a bit of a disconnect between the planning committee that you referred to, and I believe it's the company that is saying, we do or we don't have the water necessary to build and operate this place.
So what happened is, in my story, I quoted somebody, an interested party, saying that they lacked water rights. And the Energy Council reached out to me. One of their public information officer reached out to me with a document that appeared like it gave water rights through the Port of Walla Walla. I reached out to the Port of Walla Walla, and they said that was a preliminary agreement that was just based on an initial inquiry. They do not have water rights, and at this time. And that's pretty much all that they said. So I reached back to the Energy Council and sent them, quoted the email. And based on the reaction, they felt like that document, the preliminary agreement, was the water rights. And so now
a little less preliminary.
So what it means is, right now they don't have access to water that they're going to need for the construction and continued operation. And also, the company that would run this site did not dispute the fact that they lacked water rights.
And you looked into this after the story was published, and this could be another follow up, because I thought to myself, why do they need so much water to toy these windmills together? And you found that you actually need quite a bit.
Yes, you need a lot of water, because the amount of concrete that you need to build some of these things. A lot of clean energy projects require a lot of resources to build, and people focus a lot on the lack of carbon emitted while they're generating electricity, but there's the carbon or the energy and resources that are needed to build these things. And what's interesting about the water rights issue is that is actually a bigger problem for them than what Inslee's asking them to do, because even if they gave him what he wanted in terms of a certification agreement, that's a theoretical, on paper solution. But if you don't have water, the project's not being built. So it's like somebody asking you to design a car to their specifications, but they don't have fuel to put in the tank.
Okay, so what happens next with this? Now that, you've essentially informed the board that this project actually does not have water rights, and it seems as though they were misled or just had a serious detail omitted. Where are we at now with this?
Well, it really depends on what the council does in response to that discovery that they don't have water rights, because that, like I was saying, that might be a bigger issue. And also, the size of the project is going to determine how much water they're going to need. And so if they have a bigger project, that means that they may, let's say that they actually got access to water, but it wasn't enough for the project, that the scope and the size that Inslee wants. I mean, they could go back and say, we cannot get the water for the project that you want at that size, but we can get it at this size because that's the amount of water that we are able to obtain. Because as I said, it's not just building it. They need water to operate it.
Right.
They're going to need permanent water access, not just temporary for the construction. And right now they're looking at possible mitigation options other than a buffer zone around these hawk nest sites. And the interesting thing is Inslee expected them to get back in within 30 days, and we've passed that point.
Wow. Well, we'll see where it goes from there. Thank you, TJ. Semi-Bird is running under the Republican banner for the state's top office. With the blessing of President Donald Trump and a faction of loyal supporters, he secured the GOP endorsement over his primary rival, David Reichert, despite the latter polling nearly even with likely Democratic candidate Bob Ferguson in recent polls, and Bird pulling in what amounts to a rounding error by comparison. That issue now, though, is revelations of stolen valor from Bird's days in the military. Capitol correspondent Carlene Johnson had this week's latest. What has Bird been accused of, Carlene?
Well, the reports that first surfaced a couple of weeks ago came from a conservative talk show host, Jason Rantz, here in Seattle. And Bird is seen in photos wearing a special operations diver badge on his military uniform. He now concedes he never earned that. That's the stolen valor claims. And it also came out that he was given what's called a GOMER, a General Officer Memorandum of Reprimand from the Department of Defense, because he conceded to lying on some of his paperwork when he was, seeking advancement. It was considered fraud. He copped to the fraud. He also copped to the fact that he wore badges and awards that he wasn't authorized to wear. So the last couple of weeks have been complicated for the state party that endorsed him, to say the least.
Well, and it's tricky, too, because a very specific question at the convention was, when they were vetting Bird and Reichert, was, candidate Bird, is there anything else we do not know about that could factor into making our decision to endorse you for governor? And he said no.
He said no.
But since then, how has he responded to these claims in this news story?
Yeah, he's not pleased. He's not pleased that the state party hasn't come out and said, we're standing by our guy, kind of a thing. A state party chairman, Representative Jim Walsh of Aberdeen, he's been in a tricky spot, admittedly, trying to figure out how to respond to this, because you had all the Bird supporters, and there's a ton of them in central and eastern Washington. Primarily, that's where his support comes from, more conservative part of the state, right? Those people are all saying, wait a minute, we sent our delegates to the convention. They all supported him. He's copped to the fact that he posed for some pictures wearing medals he shouldn't have worn. He's also copped to the other stuff in his past about being late on child support and getting a loan, falsifying his father's signature. These are things in his past that he's owned now and said he's been forgiven for and has come to have a relationship with the Lord. And people have said, okay, we get it. People make mistakes and we move on. But so he's dug in, Semi-Bird has, and the state party's kind of gone, we're going to do our own investigation here, and came out this week and basically said, we've been talking to people in the Army. We've been talking to the DOD. And yes, everything that is alleged that he did wrong, he did. And he also is still our guy. Basically, we don't have any means or mechanism, I think is the word that Chair Walsh used, to remove him. Kind of basically going, yeah, it's legit. The story's out there. He did these things, but let the August 6th primary determine how you feel about the guy.
Yeah. I mean, I can, after reading the statement by the GOP, it seems as though they wanted to say, okay, yes, we looked into it. He said that those claims were substantiated. And I mean, that's something Byrd has said himself, that he's never denied them because they're official government documents. He has, however, really targeted the fact that somebody may have broken the law by acquiring them because they were in a sealed file where those should not have been made public. But I did hear that it was now the question of when were those documents accessed, because they weren't inked, printed, and then put directly into a safe so that no one could see it. Apparently, for a time, they were accessible by the public.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so that, I guess that's going to kind of come into play. But the GOP statement on one end said, yes, okay, that makes, this is substantiated, but we have no means or mechanism, is what you referred to rescind the endorsement. And Semi Byrd did not seem to enjoy that comment.
No.
At all.
No. And he's also really upset about the fact that when Chair Walsh released their statement saying, we've looked into this, it's substantiated that, the allegations of, stolen valor, those are legit, but we're not going to do anything about it at this point. They also linked within that document the Department of Defense things released by the Army, or that Jason Rance and his talk show host got a hold of, with some redactions in there, things that are blacked out to protect things. But Byrd told me this week, he's like, how dare they do that? This is still under investigation. We've still got the Department of Defense trying to figure out how, in fact, these documents were released and who leaked them. And so he was very upset and felt betrayed, as one of the words he used to me, by the fact that the state party that's endorsed him would then sort of kind of keep this story in the headlines, if you will.
Yeah. Well, we'll continue to follow it, but it does not sound like it's going to be fun for anyone involved with that. Thank you, Carlene. Homelessness in Washington's largest city have made national headlines, but one area in particular has earned a deadly reputation. A nonprofit is now looking to help some of the scores of homeless there, but Seattle reporter Spencer Pauly reported this week that, like nearly every other homeless project, it's not likely to be cheaply done. Spencer, describe your experience as a Seattleite with 3rd Street.
So 3rd Avenue stretches across...
3rd Avenue, I'm sorry.
No worries, yeah. Well, 3rd Avenue stretches across Seattle, but there is a 4-block corridor within downtown Seattle that's kind of grown a notorious reputation. That's where this new team kind of patrols. The area is a bit rough. There is a prominent presence of homelessness, public drug consumption, and crime. It's pretty near Pike Place, so I sometimes walk by. You have to, and so do a lot of tourists. And you can't help but notice public drug consumption. I've walked through a cloud of, perhaps it was meth smoke. That's just one of the experiences I've had to go through, I suppose, on 3rd Avenue there. Every time, you kind of walk a little bit faster when you go through.
Right. It happens. The local McDonald's has garnered a colorful name that you included in your story that I had never heard, but apparently it's well known there in Seattle.
It's in the heart of the 3rd Ave corridor there, but the McDonald's is called McStabbies by locals for the amount of crime that occurs in the nearby area.
I'm sure that the local franchise owner loves that moniker. But tell me about the nonprofit organization that says they're looking to make a difference.
Sure. The organization is called We Deliver Care. It's a newer organization started in 2020. And what it has is what they call safety ambassadors. And what they do is they refer to people living on 3rd Ave to shelter. They can administer naloxone and provide other supportive services for the homeless people in this corridor. That's what they were contracted to do by the city of Seattle, is to specifically work on this stretch of land.
Okay. Now, it seems like they're asking, as you reported in your story, for quite a bit of money. Have they been able to show that they're effective in years past?
Yeah, so they are now requesting $2.6 million for next year to continue this service, and they're requesting $640,000 for the last 3 months of this year as their contract expires in September. Now, for a span of 31 months, starting in January of last year, We Deliver Care was dedicated $4.3 million to provide these services to this 4-block corridor. Now, so far, through May, 116 people were referred to shelter out of 1,487 encounters. That's a pretty small percentage. Now, the organization said that the reason that's so low is because there's just a lack of capacity for housing, for shelter. So when you refer people to these shelters, they just join a wait list, which can take months for them to get accepted. So that was their biggest reason why that number is so low. Now, one thing to note is that out of the 116 people that were referred to housing, what this We Deliver Care basically connects them to other nonprofits that can actually provide them housing.
Right. They're not housing the people, they're referring them to other services, typically funded by KCRHA and the like. And they essentially are just the ones kind of a front line. There's what's the other organization that does something similar? The Downtown
Emergency Service Center.
Yes, exactly. So it's not like, these people are the ones that say, yes, we've put this many people since 2021 into affordable housing. That's simply just not a metric that they would be responsible for. But at the same time, it's a pretty wild amount of taxpayer dollars that they seem to be asking for. And we just, as tax-paying public, you just look at that and think, man, why does this not seem to be getting better?
Right, exactly. And that's what's so tricky about the situation. But out of the 116 people, 36 have successfully moved to permanent housing, which is an even lower, rate of success.
Right.
It's just a tough situation. And while we're seeing We Deliver Care do this, like you said, the DESC is working out there, but there's also the Downtown Seattle Association also kind of providing these services. So there's a lot of conflicting organizations and services doing this work.
I don't envy the position that they're in, but as we've heard from Seattle officials as well, it feels like that there's not enough oversight onto this massive hundreds of millions of dollars that have gone out in recent years towards a problem that does not appear to be getting much better. But thank you, Spencer. And a big thank you to our journalists for sharing their stories this week. Stay up to date with these and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach, and until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.
We all have our own behind-the-wheel persona. Are you a windows down, sing-along to your favorite song, seat lean back kind of driver? Or perhaps an AC blasting, podcast on, hugging the wheel kind of driver? However you move through life, Atlantic Union Bank is on board because we agree things should be done your way, especially banking. Work with someone you trust who's there when you need them for all the ways you bank. Call, schedule a video appointment, or make a pit stop at an Atlantic Union Bank branch to learn more. Atlantic Union Bank, any way you bank.
Every day, thousands of Comcast engineers and technologists like Oluseyi put people at the heart of everything they create.
Some of my favorite moments throughout my life are watching sports with my dad. Now I work at Comcast as part of the team that created our AI highlight technology, which uses AI to detect the major plays in a sports game.
And now, millions of sports fans will never miss a moment. Visit ComcastCorporation.com to learn more.
How about Captain Crunch's Crunch Berries with breakfast?
Whoa, Dad, we're on Crunch Island. It's Jean Lefoot.
And he stole our crunch.
Quick, the zip line.
He's getting away.
Throw our last Crunch Berry. No! No one steals my Crunch Berries.
I think you mean my Crunch Berries. Choose your own Crunch venture with Cap'n Crunch.